Welcome to Awakening Streams, the podcast of One River Zen Meditation Center in Ottawa, Illinois. Hosted by Sensei Michael Brunner. Learn more, donate, and practice with us at oneriverzen.org.
All of you here on this blustery day. It's a good day to do service, right? To hunker down in front of the fire and sit. I don't know. Sometimes I think how good we have it, that we have this practice to return to. We have the company, the warm company of Sangha, to drive us forward, to encourage us. All of us come to practice, all of us do, with some expectations, some gaining idea of where this road's going to take us. I think in some cases we think maybe it'll take us away from our own selves. It's easy to develop some sense of self-loathing, or from our own lived experience, from the things that challenge us, from the things that we're afraid of. Maybe we think we can escape. I guess there's a notion that maybe we could sit on our cushions so often that we could let our lives pass by and just doze off. I know I've had dark chapters in my life where I've just wanted to take a pill and fall asleep and wake up when it was over. Yeah? But that's not what happens when things get quiet and we sit on this cushion. The sediment on the bottom of the creek is disturbed. And we often find ourselves in very muddy water, confronting things like guilt and shame and regret. So we hope for a salve to ease the sting of our guilt and shame, or our feelings of not enoughness. Our instinct is to run. It's to run away and ignore the deep and dark and dirty parts of our lived experience. Yeah? We tuck these things deep down inside and lock them up because they don't fit into our idea of I. They're incongruent to this narrative of self. The story that we've cultivated about ourselves. Yeah? But it doesn't take long of sitting and being quiet to see that this running away isn't going to work. There's nowhere to run to, is there? I often laugh and say, that we have to show up and be in this very present moment. Where else can you be? Right? It's just whether or not you're awake to it or not. And I'll also say that we can't truly drop away the self until we see it for what it is. Until we've actually opened up to it. For this, we have to look deeply into all the creatures born of guilt and shame that live in the jail cells of our mind. And we have to release them. But when we meet them, they often aren't very pleased with having been jailed all this time. They're tinged with anger and pain, and they're resentful. So if you feel anxious from time to time, of course you do, right? Look at all these expectations that we've placed on ourselves. Look at how tightly we have to lock away all this regret and shame and guilt. There's a case in the record of Stone and Sand. It's the 6th case. It's called No Loving Kindness. It goes like this. There was an old woman in China who had supported a monk for over 20 years. She had built a little hut for him and fed him while he was meditating. Finally, she wondered just what progress he had made in all of this time. To find out, she obtained the help of a girl rich in desire. Go and embrace him, she told her. and then ask him suddenly, "What now?" So the girl called upon the monk, and without much ado caressed him, asking him what he was going to do about it. "An old tree grows on a cold rock in winter," replied the monk somewhat poetically. "Nowhere is there any warmth." The girl returned and related what he had said. "To think I fed that fellow for 20 years, exclaimed the old woman in anger. "He showed no consideration for your need, no disposition to explain your condition. He need not have responded to passion, but at least he should have evidenced some compassion." So she at once went to the hut of the monk and burned it down. There's a lot going on here, isn't there? There's a lot going on here. Interestingly enough, the first thing we do is we put ourselves in the perspective of this old woman. We think that's where the lesson is. So she's come to judge this monk who seems to have settled on some cold, sterile practice. And in a sense, perhaps that's true. Maybe he sat for a long time, and maybe he knows his limits in this arena. Maybe he's just very careful. But it seems very clear that when temptation was presented to him, he found himself running away to some remote, cold place, maybe a place he had planned ahead of time, rather than looking upon this situation with some degree of compassion. When we find people doing things unskillfully, we can sometimes find some degree of merit in recognizing that we're somehow above where they're at. Well, I'm not subject to those sort of simple passions and silliness. But we need to ensure that we're a lot more warm than that monk is. Right? I've often said it, I'll say it again, if we are not seeing each other making mistakes, then we're doing this wrong. We need to practice in a way that's open, and we need to really throw our whole selves into this practice. And when we see evidence of unskillful action, we need to walk into that, in a way celebrate it, right? Because that's why we come together as a Sangha, to practice, to lift up one another, and to create a container where when you fall, there's people here to tend to you and not run away from it. So when this monk turned away from that, it'd be very easy for us to encourage him to be a little more compassionate for the situation at hand. Maybe to have involved others. Maybe to have actually just looked at the situation and seen his own self in that woman's dysregulated passion. But before we judge too harshly, we can actually turn the tables here and look at the situation that the woman has brought to pass. What did she settle on already? What's with this notion of testing the monk? Perhaps she's got some idea of how things are supposed to be. Certainly, she's not evidencing a ton of compassion. And she's making some projections on this monk about how a monk ought to behave. How ought a monk to behave? Precisely like a human being. And so this monk is clearly attempting or doing his best to practice the way. And the woman up until now has supported him, but turns on him the moment that his behavior doesn't match her expectations. This look familiar to you guys? You see this from time to time? We have a culture that is obsessed with this. Canceling people, judging people, setting people up to fail. We see it in our politics. We see it in the way our news works. We see it in our social action groups, where literally the tautology of their dogma is set up so that there's no option other than to be a victim. We've got to transcend that. We've got to look beyond that. We ourselves have to be a part of that change. We have to let go of our judgments, let go of our expectations. Aside from the expectation that things are unpredictable and changing, and that we're often not going to be as skillful as we could be, and we're going to witness unskillful acts on others. But that's why we practice. We don't practice to become an arhat and to be somehow removed from this mire of existence. We get down in those deep, dark, muddy places. And we wrestle with how to evidence compassion, how to manifest this compassion when things go wrong, when things don't go the way we expect them. But it starts with you looking deeply into your own heart. If your practice is about trying to manifest with some degree of purity or precision, then you're still clinging to the story. Instead, go looking for an opportunity to be present with and encourage somebody when things don't go to plan. And recognize that when we bear witness to unskillfulness, it's not out there, right? That unskillfulness is not out there. It's in here.
Thank you for joining us. If this podcast was meaningful to you and supported your practice, please give us a hand by joining us at oneriverzen.org.